Good morning and welcome to Sunday morning Bible class here at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Kitchener, Ontario. It is our joy to be able to present this in an online format via the live stream this morning as opposed to the in-person Bible class, which we would typically be beginning right about this hour if people were able to gather in numbers here in the building. We're working our way through the book of Esther, and today we come to one of the best parts of the story, just from the story perspective, the reversals and the intrigue and the palace drama that surrounds the queen, the king, Haman, and Mordecai. So, welcome to our class this morning. If you have not gotten yourself a copy of the lesson sheet and you would like to do so, that's available at the church website, and you can download it. The lesson sheet is right under the connection for the live stream this morning. And if you have any questions during Bible class today, I have my cell phone with me, and it's working. That is my email address there, and we'll happily receive questions, comments, even outright argument if you want to make it. That's all fine and dandy with me. Just a word in advance, however, if your question is a bit more complicated and my brain isn't working at the speed it should be, I may defer you and respond to you by email or perhaps even hold the question until next week. But most of the time, that's not too big a problem. All right. As we are wont to do here at Holy Cross, we know you're just getting your coffee and getting yourself organized, getting your Bible open to the book of Esther. We'll take a couple of minutes to review some of my gleanings from the internet this past week. We've been on a bit of a theme here lately of people doing silly things with masks, masking their dogs, masking just their noses so that they can eat a sandwich and still be masked. Here's another idea that may work for you. That is an orange. I see some people, the cantors are here in the church, and that is an orange that this man has fashioned an elastic to, and he's wearing. I suppose that would work. I don't know. You have to like the smell of orange, that's for sure. If you really want to get your sinuses cleaned out and stay healthy, an orange may be the thing to do. Now, a number of people have sent me the next one, and I've laughed every time I've got it. But when I saw it on a church sign that I found on the internet, I thought we got to show it here. I want to be like Saul and on the road to demask us. There you go. Ha, ha, ha. Yes, we are all getting there eventually. Some places in the world you can do that already. We're not quite there yet here in Ontario. We will hopefully get there at some point in time. And like the people of Pastor Turner's church in Mount Lebanon, wherever that happens to be, we'll be on that road. Well, another little thing we've begun doing here last week is getting people up to date on things that you can get for that your husband, father, grandfather, that sort of thing. I found another great clothing idea. If you'd like to get something very unique for Dad, that is a look that has not been seen for a very, very, very long time. But we've got the wide tie, the business shirt there, the short shorts, and then of course you got to cover up some of your legs. So let's go with really high stockings and loafers. Yeah. Anyway, it's all on sale this week. If Value Village were open, you could probably get all of this stuff for the advertised prices on the screen. And as I said last week, a good chunk of it is probably for trail, which means it has not worn out and never will. At any rate, there you go, another Father's Day shopping idea. All right, and one more here. This is a video of something that has happened to many pastors. You just watch this here. giving a blessing, and getting the high five back. And the mother is dreadfully embarrassed. We'll play. That's not a very long one. We'll play it again here just for the sheer fun of it here. Where's the play button here? I did it a minute ago. We'll go back. There. Can we do it again? Here we go, in case you missed it. Probably a first communion. Yes, sir. Bless you too. Yeah. This does happen sometimes in real life here, even at Holy Cross, when children come up for communion at communion time with their parents to receive a blessing. I have had a few want to high five me, and it's very embarrassing to the parents. I usually get an apologetic email later in the afternoon, apologizing for the kids' behavior, but I'm laughing, and there's no apologies needed. Anyway, let's get back to Esther again here. We are in Esther chapter 4 at the very, very end. I want to just take a few minutes and kind of recap where we were last time, because it very much sets up where we're going today. The edict has been issued to exterminate, annihilate, totally destroy all the Jewish people in the Persian Empire. And this all stems, as you may recall, from Haman taking offense when Mordecai, the Jew, refuses to bow down to him. And Haman, rather than take it out just on Mordecai, decides to take out his anger on everyone. And he dupes the king into signing an edict that all of the Jewish people are to be exterminated. And unwittingly, the king has signed the death warrant for his queen. She may not have quite understood that right away, that she was not above the law in this case. So her cousin and guardian, Mordecai, tells her, and in his reasoning back and forth with her, asks her this question. A question that, as I said last time, if people know, kind of one key Bible verse out of the book of Esther, it's this one. Who knows, Mordecai asks, who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? Namely, that it's not a coincidence, not just pure chance, not just a random thing that Esther has become the queen at this very point in time. That maybe this is God's time for there to be a Jewish queen over the Persian Empire. And Esther ponders that. And at the end of her pondering, she sends this reply to Mordecai. She's going to seize the moment here, take, if you will, the step of faith. And she says to Mordecai, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." Now again, just by way of reminder, people didn't just waltz in to see the king. Even if you were the queen, you did not appear unbidden before the king, and you dare not speak to the king unless he would extend to you a golden scepter and point to you, and then you would have the opportunity to speak. And Esther was quite worried about what would happen to her if she did that, because the penalty for that was death, and it applied to everybody. So this had been her reason for struggling. What if this happens and I'm not recognized and I die? And so she comes to the conclusion, which is actually a very logical conclusion, that if she says nothing, she will die. But if she says something, she just might die. And so she takes the might over the surety. and in that moment of truth then goes before the king. And it's all a little bit reminiscent. We didn't quite get to this slide last week, and we're always trying to make connections where we can in Old Testament stories into the New Testament as well. And here Jesus, when he's in the garden and he's praying to his Father, and praying so intensely that it is as if he's dripping blood, and he's wrestling with the Father there in the garden, and is wrestling with the same sorts of things that Esther is. Now, we sometimes, kind of gloss over these moments in Jesus' life because we also know that Jesus was God. And we kind of go, well, as God, he knew, yada, 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 yada. Well, to some degree, yes, absolutely. But we also need to remember that Jesus was every bit as human as you and me, every bit as human as Esther was there. And so he comes to this moment, and it's very much what happens to Esther in the Old Testament is very similar to what happens to Jesus in the garden. He faces the ultimate defining moment, having been called by God in the fullness of time for such a time as this. And he responds, as Esther responded before him, with resolute conviction and courage. His prayer, in a certain sense, a little bit like Esther, if I perish, I perish. Not my will, but yours be done. And with courage, he went to the cross, knowing that he would certainly perish, and there would be no golden scepter extended for his escape. But he also did so knowing that in his perishing, God would accomplish the deliverance of his people, a salvation much greater than deliverance from the edict of Haman, a salvation from the judgments of sin, death, and evil. So even though, and we've mentioned this a number of times along the way, there is no explicit reference to God in the book of Esther. And even when Esther talks about fasting, it doesn't include praying, but it most certainly likely did include a lot of praying. Even though that's kind of missing, and seems a bit strange perhaps, what's happening just under the surface is very much what happens in the life of Christ. And we'll see another example today. In a kind of a way, Esther's life is a bit of a foreshadowing of the life of Christ himself, a piece of gospel, if you will, good news in the Old Testament. All right. With that behind us, just take a quick check in case we've garnered any early opposition here, so to speak. I always love it when my phone, I pick it up, but it's got facial recognition, and it then says face not recognized. I'm like, yes, that's very good. All right. We move on. Esther chapter 5. This is the story gets interesting here. So if you have your Bibles handy and you want to read along here, we're going to read the first 4 verses or so and summarize it and begin to move forward. On the 3rd day, this is the 3rd day of Esther's fasting, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing at the court, he was pleased with her and held out the gold scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter that was in his hand. And the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request?" "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you." We'll just stop there for a half a second to realize that's just to the end of verse 3. We'll pick verse 4 up in just a second. So what Esther does here is not barge in. Already she begins to show a kind of shrewdness that we're going to see unfold over the next 2 chapters. Esther may have been chosen to be queen by some, fairly seedy means, but she is by no means a shy violet. She's very smart, she's very articulate, and she's very shrewd. She knows how the palace operates, and so rather than barging in, she hangs around in the outer court. She puts on her royal robes, which we know the king kind of likes from way back in chapter 1 when he wanted his previous wife and queen to entertain his guests at the banquet by showing up in her royal robes. And she just kind of hangs around a little bit. And I've got our little diagram here again of the king's palace in Susa. And probably, this is the throne right here. And probably where Esther hangs around is in this area here called the inner court. And this would be in direct sight line of the throne. And she would have probably just sort of been around these entrances here and maybe a little bit to the side where there were entrances. One of the things about the palace, even though we don't know a whole lot, and they haven't really totally been able to reconstruct or figure out all the details of the court at Susa, is that the sight lines in the palaces in the Persian Empire were very, very good. There was a real emphasis on the king being able to see what was going on around him. And, when you think about it for a little bit, that's probably quite wise. Earlier in the book, of course, Mordecai, this is where kind of the intrigue all starts, uncovers that plot by 2 of the guards. And the king needed to be wary of things. And they didn't have all the sophisticated devices we have today to make sure nobody is up to any great mischief. And so part of how they protected the king was to make sure he had very good sight lines and he could see from the throne pretty much everything that was going on around him. And so it's probably there that she kind of hangs out and then comes forward. And Xerxes extends to her the golden scepter, and she can ask for anything up to half my kingdom. Now, this is almost certainly an exaggeration. There is no way he's going to give up control of 63 and a half of his provinces to his wife. There were 127 provinces in the Persian Empire. He is not, under any circumstances, going to give her half of that. It's a kind of an exaggerated request, and it is the exact same request that Herod Antipas later in the New Testament, or offer rather, that Herod Antipas will make to Herodias' daughter when she comes and dances before the king and his guests at another tawdry, seedy banquet. And he promises her, anything you want up to half my kingdom. It's just exaggeration for effect. And in both cases, the requests are quite a bit less significant than that. And all that Esther does, I'll read verse 4 now. If it pleases the king, replied Esther, let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him. That's it. All he has to do, show up at a banquet. And so she's working her way very subtly to get to the main thing. Now, as I was putting together the PowerPoint yesterday, I had a lot of trouble, I'm just going to say this, finding a picture of Esther coming before the king with her requests. That's not because there are a shortage of pictures of this event in the story, but almost every picture shows Esther swooning, fainting, as she comes before the queen. Here she is, passing out. Here she is again, passing out. And a third time, as she comes before Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, swooning once again. I just thought this was amazing because there's absolutely no reference to it in the Bible. I don't think Esther swooned at all. But every artist from anywhere has decided, this must have just been so overwhelming for her that, she just fainted away. And I think that's a little bit of sexism, I think, that finds its way into art every once in a while. The thought that because she's a woman, perhaps she's not quite up to this. We'll see this as the story unfolds. I'll comment on it a bit later. There's kind of a wonderful little irony, delicious little irony in Esther, the whole book. If you recall back at the very beginning of the story, the king issues the edict to his kingdom. When Vashti refuses to appear before him, this edict is sent out stating, the man is the king of the castle, whether it's the big castle or the little hut that you live in, the man is the king. And yet all the way through the story, it's the women who drive the storyline along. And it's the women who show the great strength and resolve. Not just Esther, but Vashti too, in her own right, refusing the king and protecting her dignity and that sort of thing. And we'll see it again one more time here in the story. And it's just kind of a lovely thing, I think, that it all starts off with this great pronouncement. And then as the story unfolds, we just see how absolutely unworkable that is in real life, a kind of a minor theme. All right, so the banquet happens. Let's read on. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine, Haman likes his wine, the king said to Esther, "Now, what is your petition? It will be given to you, and your request, even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." And you can probably just sort of imagine the guy, he's had a few drinks, and he's feeling no pain, and, so his largesse is out there. He wants to just give everything he can to his queen. And once again, Esther shoots low. She doesn't want half the kingdom. Not at all. My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question. And here, Esther ratchets up the shrewdness another level or two. Because what she does here is she more or less sets the stage where he is absolutely binding himself to give to her whatever she wants. She doesn't want half the kingdom. She's not going to take him up on that offer. But she uses this little word, if. If the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then come tomorrow to the banquet. So if he says yes to this, and he is willing to do this, he's more or less guaranteed that he is going to give to her whatever she asks. He's bound himself to it. His own honor is tied up in this now at this point in time. And she very, very, very carefully moves this thing along so that he's going to be backed into a corner, and he's going to have to give her what she wants, because she knows her request is large. Not half the kingdom large, but large. And it calls, this is one of these points where we can stop and ponder a little bit, I think. Advancing the slide here. To the whole, how it is that we, as Christians, step out in faith. I love this picture of the banquet too. It looks like the king and the joker from a deck of cards are sitting with the queen. I just thought, well, it's lovely use of color, and once again, a little too European probably for the time, but be that as it may. And Esther here looks like she's got bunny ears on or something, or rabbit ears, or anyway, whatever. All right. Bold and careful planning. That's what we were going to talk about here. And this comes over into the New Testament as well. This is another point, point of connection to what Jesus is going to teach his disciples. He's going to send the disciples out on an even greater mission than Esther had. The Great Commission to go out into all the world and to proclaim the gospel. And that we are to live by faith and not by sight. Yet at the same time, in a couple of passages of the New Testament, he's absolutely crystal clear that we go about this mission not just leaping off of cliffs and hoping we'll survive, not doing rash and foolish things without thinking them out, but that the head and the heart, if you will, have to kind of go together. And we go into mission, Jesus will tell us, I'm sending you out, he says, like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. Picks up that, kind of typical animal imagery, the serpent being seen as the deceiver all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, and continuing to have that reputation of being something that brings evil. It's an image that we still, cling to today. Many of us, when we see a snake, even if it's just a harmless little garter snake, we kind of don't want to get too close because we're not very trusting of those particular kinds of animals, even if they're harmless. At least most of us aren't. And on the other hand, the innocence of the dove. And we're to encompass both. We're to go out there innocently, lovingly, trustingly, and yet at the same time, wisely, shrewdly, thinking through and planning out what it is that we're to do. Or, as we encounter in another parable that Jesus tells, the story of the unjust manager heading off to Oktoberfest in the picture here. I think that's where he's going. Where the manager here, you remember this parable, where the manager is about to be fired for how he has mismanaged the accounts of his master. And when he learns he's going to lose his job, he calls in all the people who owe his master money, and he starts cooking the books, right? Cut your debt in half, write down a little bit more, pay me a bit. And the master, and also Jesus too, in a certain sense, commends this guy for his shrewdness. He says the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into eternal dwellings. Here Jesus he's saying, be shrewd out there. Think like this guy thinks. What's the mission? Focus on the mission. He needs to find a place for himself. He's too weak to dig and too ashamed to beg, and he needs a soft landing somewhere, so he thinks it through. And what Jesus is he's not commending the dishonesty. He's not telling us to go out there and rob and cheat and be dishonest with people, but he's telling us to be wise about how we do things, to keep what really needs to be important in the forefront of our minds. It's a troubling parable. A lot of people struggle with it. It's actually one of my favorites because I think it really, challenges us to think through what we're doing. Even though we move forward in faith, we do so thoughtfully, carefully, deliberately, and when we do that, the results are often far better. And again, Jesus himself. This isn't necessarily just taking a blind leap. Jesus ultimately on the cross has to take the greatest, leap of faith, if you will, when he's hanging there, crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Left alone and abandoned on the cross. And yet at the end of it all, he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And that's a kind of a deep, trusting faith that comes because he knows that what he's doing is really aligned with the Father's will. And that this has all been thought through and planned out from eternity. That this is how God would save the world. Yet in his humanity, he's again taking the leap, if you will, on the cross and trusting his soul into the hands of the Father. So Esther, prepares us in a certain sense for our own mission and to new perspectives on the life of Christ. That we combine that childlike faith and trust with mature thought and reason, using our heart, to give us the enthusiasm and the excitement for the mission that God has given to us, and using our brains to plan that out and do that work with the gifts that God's given to us. All right. Took a little look at my phone here. We don't have any great objections or large questions at this point, so we'll move forward. The banquet ends, and Haman goes home a happy man. He's had a lot of good things happen for him in his life recently. He's been promoted to be second in command of the kingdom, and he just had a lovely banquet with the queen, and everything has gone swimmingly well that evening. No great requests, no great problems, and so he leaves. And chapter 5, verse 9 is where we're at now. Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, old Mordecai's back at the gate again. We don't know whether he's actually in the gate, around the gate, near the gate, whatever. When he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. But he restrained himself and went home. Now remember what I said a little bit ago about women stepping forward and taking leading roles in the story? Haman is very upset that once again Mordecai has refused to honor him, refused to acknowledge him, refused to respect him or his office. And so Haman gets home that night, and he calls together his friends and Zeresh, his wife. Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him and how he had elevated him above all other nobles and officials. Haman's a very self-consumed individual, if you haven't figured that out by now. And that's not all. Got more good things to tell you. I am the only person, the only one, Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave. And she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. Won't be home for supper, honey. Got a meeting with the king and the queen. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate. Sometimes that happens. You can have so many good things going for you. Everything is going right. Everything is going good. And one thing goes wrong. And that's the thing that you focus in on. I struggle with that myself. If I'm working on a project or something out in the garage and I've got it like 95% right, and there's this one little blemish, that's the thing I'll be thinking about, when I come in and I'm done working. Why did I do that? Why was that mistake there? And I'm probably not alone in that. I'm part of the Haman crowd too. My own vanity, my own pride gets the best of me sometimes, and we all probably do that. And there, he comes home, and this is what's really occupying his mind. Well, have no fear. His wife, Zeresh, has an answer. His wife Zeresh said, and all his friends said to him, well, silly, there's a way to deal with that. Have some gallows built, 75 feet high, and then go to work in the morning and ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. And then go with the king to dinner and be happy. Oh, yeah, says Haman, good idea. And he had the gallows built. All right. Lovely, lovely, lovely story. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, okay, 75 feet? That's a lot of feet. And it may be here, too, that there's a little bit of deliberate exaggeration on Zeresh's part. Like, really? We're going to go 23 meters in the air here to hang this guy? The palace itself, as best we can tell archaeologically, was only about 45 feet high. So we're going to go 30 feet above the palace, and we're going to make a gallows on all of this? Really? So it may be that she's, just kind of grabs 75 feet out of the air, as just a number, and not really meaning it quite literally. However, if you're wondering how such a thing could work, some Jewish architect, we know it's Jewish because there's a little bit of Hebrew here and there on the drawing, has given us an idea how this contraption might possibly have worked. Namely, to have one really long beam, a ladder, and a pulley, one of the simple tools. If you remember that unit back in elementary school, if they still teach it, you can do a lot of things with a pulley. So you have a pulley at the end of the ladder, you hoist the fellow up, and then you hang him up there and let nature take its course. I have no idea whether that's how this was built or not, but I couldn't help but be thankful that somebody tried to engineer the project just to see how this might be, and how they'd get that thing built in just a day. Again, there's a few things that, like I say, I kind of lean to perhaps as a bit of exaggeration for effect. Just build a high gallows and hang the guy. That's all you have to do, Haman. And this is, as I said, part of this delightful little irony that is unfolding through the story here. I mean, here, first the king isn't king of his own castle, and now the second in command He needs to get the counsel of his wife on how to handle his problems. It is reminiscent of another Old Testament story, the story of from a few centuries before of Ahab and Jezebel, where she's the one. He can't seem to get his mind straight to do anything, but she's the one that tells him exactly what he needs to do and how he needs to do it. All right. So with that in mind, Haman goes to bed. He's ordered the gallows to be built, and he's ready to turn in for the night. Which brings us to the beginning of chapter 6, where some are able to sleep, and others are not. So we come to the section of the story that we call Sleepless in Susa. And the king is back at the palace, and obviously the rich food has done what rich food sometimes does to a person, makes it difficult to sleep. Chapter 6, verse 1 and following. That night, the king could not sleep. So he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. There you go. A lot of self-focus here again, which is pretty typical in this story. And so they're reading to him all the things that he has done and accomplished and the key moments of his reign so far. Probably not anything mentioned about the failed campaign in Greece, but the story of Mordecai is in there. Remember, that was a little footnote that was that's in the text just when Mordecai saves the life of the king. It's written in the annals, and I sort of said, kind of flag that because it's going to be important later. Here it is. This is why it's important. Why? Because the king has this read. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, also known as Little Thana, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway and who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Oh, yeah, remember that. Well, what honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Well, nothing. Nothing was ever done for him, the attendants answered. And so he calls out to see who's in the court. And it may be that Haman was also sleepless, or if he had a little nap, he got up still in the dark of the night and hustled himself back over to the palace again to begin to prepare his request that Mordecai be hanged. And so the king asks, who's out in the court right now? Who's working tonight? Now Haman, we're at chapter 6, verse 4. Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected. And so the attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Well, bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? And now we see the true nature of Haman. Haman thought to himself, well, whose is there that the king would rather honor than me? You know? So he answers the king. Well, this is what I'd like to have done for me. If I want to if I'm going to be honored again, let me tell you how that proceeds. So, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring the royal robe the king has worn, and the horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. And let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on a horse through the streets, proclaiming before him, This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Oh, he's got his own ticker tape parade all laid out for himself. Just put me in the royal gown, Your Majesty. Give me the royal horse. Have somebody lead me through the city, and that'll be great. Amazing how quickly Mordecai falls out of his mind at this point in time. He'll take that. But then comes the great reversal of the whole story. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the royal robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have suggested. Now, if sometimes when you get news that's unexpected, you get that finally kind of feeling in your gut like, oh, I was not expecting this. It happens when a good thing happens. It happens when a bad thing happens. And Mordecai probably just about completely loses himself in this moment because he's got this all figured that he's getting the award. Kind of like, in the Emmys, the Oscars, and all these other shows that I don't really watch, but, the hype is all for one guy, one, this is going to get it, this is going to get it, this is the one, and the person kind of believes that they're going to get it, and then, lo and behold, somebody else is picked, and you'll have that camera shot of the guy that didn't get picked, that everybody thought was going to get picked, and there's this, kind of strained little smile on his face, and it's like, oh no, please get the camera off me, and that's what happens here. Haman just thinks this is all for me. I'm getting another good day in my life, and now he finds out he has to lead Mordecai through the city, but he does it. He knows to refuse the king is not a good idea either. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man who the king delights to honor." Now, there are all kinds of paintings of this and art pieces, but I chose this one simply for the look on the Haman fellow's face and the fists. I just thought, yeah, that's probably how you do it. You're gripping that rein so tight, dragging that horse through the streets while Mordecai's up there having the time of his life in the royal garb on the royal horse and all of that sort of thing. And so he takes Mordecai through the streets. Mordecai is honored, and everything is good. And then I do have a question. We'll get to that in a half a second here. I'm just going to finish out the story quick. Mordecai goes back to the king's gate again and resumes his normal activity after this little parade in his honor. Haman, on the other hand, rushes home, his head covered in grief. And he told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that happened to him. And then his advisors and his wife, Zeresh, said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is one of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but surely fall before him. You will surely come to ruin." Well, there's a difficult truth, but once again, it's the woman, it's Zeresh, who conveys that truth, helps Haman see his situation, that his fortunes are beginning to be changed here, that this man that he has despised so terribly is actually the one the king has honored, and his downfall has begun. And while they're still talking, the king's eunuchs arrive and hurry Haman away to the banquet Esther prepared. And if there's a moral of the story at this point in time, it's the old proverb from chapter 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before the fall. Now we have a question here. Oops, hit the wrong email. There we go. Okay, why didn't Xerxes know that his wife was Jewish? Could be, I may have mentioned this when we were going through. She doesn't reveal it, obviously, that she is of Jewish extraction. But there's this whole year that she spends, or a better part of a year, that she spends in the king's harem. And a lot of the time that was spent there was spent in kind of beauty treatments, if you will. But one of the keys to those beauty treatments, and this is, I don't think I actually mentioned this, was a series of baths that women would undergo, particularly if they were somewhat darker complexion than the Persians may have been. There was a kind of a skin whitening process and lightening process. So by the time, after a whole year of these treatments and the various things that she had gone through, she probably looked every bit as Persian as the Persian women who were there. And and through the makeup and everything else like that, the goal would have been to make her into the ideal Persian woman. If there were any, kind of explicit, traits that would indicate that she may be Jewish, there would have probably been stuff done to, either hide those things or change them, or do what they could to make her look as Persian as possible. And then probably that continued the rest of her time in the castle or in the palace there with the king. So that's my best guess, but that's actually not really a guess. That's actually out of the commentaries, because that is a legit question. How did he not figure it out all on his own? Well, because they used makeup and other things to make her look every bit the Persian that she wasn't. All right, that is the end of our time for today. Next week we get into the real highlight of the story, where Esther reveals the plot, and Haman gets his comeuppance, and everything begins to sort itself out, but not all that simply either. Anyway, we'll dig into that next time. So God's blessings as you continue to study the Scriptures this week, and we'll sign off now, and we'll be back in about 15 to 20 minutes with our worship service on this Pentecost Sunday. God's blessings.